Hello and welcome back after quite a fair amount of time to Amiable Arguments. I'm still Luca, even after these 2 months, and I'm joined today by a new guest, a friend of mine called Verity. So, Verity, hi, thank you for being on the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
That's quite all right. I'm very much looking forward to what we've got to discuss. So, Verity, what do you want to bring to the table to discuss over a cup of tea today?
Um, I want to discuss the culture war because if anyone knows me well, they know that I never stop talking about it. So it's nice just to have one conversation recorded, and maybe I don't need to go on so much.
Excellent, fantastic. So if you want to know Verity's perspective on the culture war, you'll never have to hear from her again apart from on here. It'll be an excellent premium 5-hour podcast, which is entirely Verity talking, and you won't hear another word from me for the rest of the show. So, Verity, this culture war, is it real?
Yes, yeah, I really do think it is. I mean, I got no clout to say that. Currently, I'm a dinner lady at a hospital. But at the same time, I have recently graduated university, a liberal arts university, and I'm kind of trying to start a career in stand-up comedy. So I've kind of grappled with these issues for since we've been locked down. You get the time to kind of look over them, and yeah, have some thoughts.
Fantastic. So, would you say that this because it's I think every newspaper, most of the mainstream media sites, and certainly the alternative platforms, they all use that language now. They use the idea that this is a culture war. Do you think culture war is a very accurate way of describing what this country is currently faced with?
I think it is because, like, the origins of what woke culture is in itself is something that's very kind of middle class. It's so concerned with being polite and speaking correctly. Like, even the term political correctness suggests that there's one way we speak in private and another that we speak in public, which is, if you're going to put that into society, then it's going to be realised.
Yes.
And I think also the fact that it has such a grounding in academia and in the academy. So Peter Boghossian talks really well about this idea laundering, and it was back in 2019 in the Wall Street Journal. He kind of started to explain this idea of this idea laundering that is happening in universities. And so I'll explain what idea laundering is. It's like money laundering. So in universities, very well established universities, it kind of started in America. You would have, I think it's a testament to the fact that we have such a developed society and like civilization, that we have these institutions that are doing that are focused on furthering knowledge. But then as part of those institutions, you also have professors and modules and sometimes whole degrees in things like grievance studies. So that's things like women's studies, fat studies, trans studies, or that sounds pretty extreme, but that is the reality, especially in American universities and in English universities. I think it's kind of more, so you might do a degree in English literature, but you can choose certain modules. So you never have to read a British book at all, which I'm not saying is a good or bad thing. It's just when you can choose what information you're getting, then you're always going to be biased, and that's not really critical thinking. And so you do kind of worry that people are going into university and coming out with less knowledge and less skills
Yes.
than if you just sat at home for 3 years and read some books.
Yeah.
But saying that, I've so just come out of university, so I'm not slating it. I'm just saying, now we pay for university. Like, I knew fully well that I was paying nearly 30 grand to study something that isn't particularly applicable to the real world, but that's the price you pay. Or, like, I guess we don't really pay it, but
well, if we pay it back, because obviously, if we ever, but otherwise it's it's out of the British taxpayer, isn't it? It's with the tuition fees and everything. So okay. So I suppose one of the most interesting things that you've sort of said there is that the idea that, so say for example you take English literature, okay, and you take a bunch of these English books, whether it's Mary Wollstonecraft or Oscar Wilde or whoever it may be, but then obviously one of the beauties of doing something like that is you can analyse it from the historical context, what it is at the time, and you can also analyse it from different ideological positions. But whereas something that perhaps such as women's studies or fat studies, they are more prone to, well, it encourages you to see the world through a particular way. I think this would also, it's not one that you named, but it's certainly, we also have now, don't we, things like white studies or whiteness studies or blackness studies, and it's always capital B or capital W, because it's not white as in just a characteristic. It's white as in the politicization of whiteness or blackness, respectively. And that's something that we're seeing more and more of.
Yeah, I think these ideas kind of they've come out of the universities because of people like Michel Foucault, who in the 70s wrote his postmodernist theories, which kind of look at the world in power structures and how this is, how this can be a bad thing or a good thing. But it's now in 2020s we see like a lot of applied postmodern theories in universities, and so things like critical race theory are really taking hold, especially in the US. People are very scared about it being brought into K through 12 education, because it is one way to look at the world, but it's a very reductive way, and it's but it's been passed through because just to get back onto what idea laundering is, it's when someone writes something and then it gets peer reviewed, and then it gets, that kind of starts its way onto a journey onto becoming knowledge. But these theories and these ideas that we're holding up are just theories, but I think we're forgetting that because they're being built upon as if it's knowledge, which is not to say it shouldn't happen, but because of the demographic makeup of university, so it's
sorry, Verity, the mic just cut a little bit there. Just go back 2 sentences.
So I think you can build on theories because obviously that's what knowledge is, but these theories aren't rooted in reality or anything that can be proven or disproven, and so it is just loose theory and it's being built upon. So say you had Simone de Beauvoir, and then Angela Carter built on her, and then Judith Butler built on her. It's going to make the ideas more extreme, because it's like, I think it's kind of St. Georgian retirement syndrome. And so when you build on all of these ideas and they become knowledge, because universities are predominantly very left-wing people, and it's a very middle class. It's very middle class to go to university, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just it does mean that there is a complete lack of viewpoint diversity within the institutions. And so when it comes to peer reviewing and what gets passed through, there's going to be a skewed bias. And so
because a lot
James
of it
Lindsay,
is self-affirming.
Yeah, it's confirmation bias. You're only going, you're going to support the things that you already believe in, or something that backs up your own work, your own thesis, or uses the right language. And I think it was James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian that set up the Grievance studies Hoax. And I just think that was such a moment to show the treason that's going on in the academies, because so I'll break it down. So the Grievance studies Hoax happened through 2017 and 2018, and so Pluckrose, Lindsay and Boghossian are all academics, very prominent in their fields, all university professors, and they got together to try and get fake papers published in academic journals. But all of these fake papers were so they entailed they wanted to get into cultural, queer, race, gender and fat and sexuality studies into journals, just to kind of comment on how this ideology is finding its way into our institutions. And so I'll just give you an example of a paper they published. One was called, this got published, and it's now all retracted, but it's Human Reactions to Rape Culture and Queer Performativity at Urban Dog Parks in Portland, Oregon.
I'd love to see them.
You can't. I've tried to read them. You can't, because they've been taken down. Or there's one that's called, this is one of my favourites, Our Struggle is My Struggle, Solidarity Feminism as an Intersectional Reply to neoliberal and choice feminism. And so what they've done is they've taken a chapter of Mein Kampf and made it intersectionally feminist by replacing the word Jew or Jewish with the word straight white man. And it's pending. It was pending to get published.
Wow. And the scary thing is, it probably would have done. It probably...
Yeah, had they not been found out. Because all the citing was correct, and they'd read all of these books that, so they got the knowledge down. And then, so they wrote papers really, really quickly. And it's just terrifying to think that. And how would you know? How would you know what's a real study and what's a fake one when they all study such odd, made-up concepts?
Yes, it's very... I mean, even the titles alone, they're very, very word salad. They're very just, I'm going to throw in as many big words as I can, because it just creates this, this sort of sophistry and this pseudo-intellectualism, which isn't to say, of course, these people aren't intelligent, because they clearly really are, and they very much know what they're talking about. And, this podcast is all about, giving one's intellectual opponents the charity of believing that they mean what they say. To not always assume the worst in everything that people say, which is the reason why I set all this up, because I just saw that more and more we were deciding to take the least favourable interpretation of one another's words when it came to these sorts of debates. But I was going to joke, when you said about my struggle, I thought, Mein Kampf, and then you said it, and I was sort of like, wait, what? But okay, yeah, so I think a good place to sort of take that from there then is that, say, for example, I know one time when we spoke before we were having a debate about something, and we were discussing the idea of white privilege. And I was just wondering to talk about that a little bit, because not to sort of go back to that time when we were debating it, but to use it as a point to discuss the idea that white privilege, like any sort of privilege, is a it's all these sorts of things, like whether it be patriarchy or white privilege or and not just things that are normally associated with the left wing, obviously. This also comes true for things like conservatism and even human rights. These are metaphysical ideas. They're not real. They're constructs that we've created and that we build around. So I suppose the problem with those sorts of things is that if we don't agree on the metaphysics, and if we're talking at cross purposes and one person is trying to fix the world believing that white privilege exists and the other one is trying to find solutions and not believing that white privilege exists, then it's going to make things a lot harder because we're not starting out on the same level of agreeing what one of the problems is.
Definitely. There's kind of two points in there. The first is that like these ideas they have a kernel of truth in them. I think that's why they spread so quickly. You know, we do know that racism has been a problem, is still a problem, but also due to perception gaps, a lot of people don't understand that most people are abhorred by racism. True racism, people are they are disgusted by it. But now we have it's a takeover of language, and this is why I think the universities come into it, because it's kind of spilled from there to online, and then social media is such a problem when it comes to talking to each other.
Apart from on this program, like and subscribe. Apart from on this podcast, like and subscribe.
Oh, apart from definitely. But yeah, I think also the idea that if we think something as a culture, we will manifest it, and I think that can definitely be seen in this, like in these critical theories, because so if you take like Ibram X. Kendi, so he's recently been very vocal, saying things like, a true anti-racist accepts that they're a racist when they're called a racist. An actual racist denies it when they're called a racist. And so you think, well, I can't do anything without being a racist.
Well, that sounds exactly like, in the olden days when you used to have the witch trials, and it's like, well, we'll drown her, and if she drowns and dies, then she wasn't a witch, and if she admits that she's a witch, then she's a witch, and we also kill her. So there's absolutely no way out of it. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
100%, yeah. I do actually a bit of stand-up about white guilt, because I kind of want to talk about this kind of this like oppression Olympics that we've constructed that says things like, so it's kind of the intersectionality argument that like everyone is oppressed somehow, but you have to find the most oppressed person in the room. It's just like a shit, where's Wally? Why do we need to find the most historically oppressed person in the room? I think it's dangerous, because obviously, as not to sound like Jordan Peterson, but humans are like lobsters, and they love hierarchy, and so this is what we're trying to do, but we're actually trying to do it in a way that is quite radical and quite like, it's kind of like a caste system. They're like, oh, but if you're gonna go on someone's immutable characteristics and say that that's 100% of what they are, I think it's such a dangerous precedent to set, and it also leads to like, if people of these minority groups do speak out against the ideology, they are suddenly not that. So like, I'm a woman, if I say I don't really agree with intersectional feminism, I'm no longer a woman, because I don't. It's just, they're just going to strip you of your identity, because apparently that's the only thing you are as well.
Yes.
So it's...
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying there. There was something I wanted to come to you on there, which was that you were saying about the most the largest, sort of historical grievance that we can find, and who is the most oppressed person. So obviously, I suppose what the critical race theory and what the wokeness is, what it claims to be about, and I believe that it, for certain people, that they are, honest people in all this, and this is what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to achieve some level of social justice and to right some wrongs that were done in the past. But I think the reason why, well, I hope that the movement is running into a bit of a brick wall, and I think that it is. And I think one of the things that is proof of the fact that the British people, generally speaking, are not a fan of this wokeness, is the fact that the Conservative Party is currently sitting on a massive majority and the Labour Party is sitting on a minority. And don't get me wrong, I don't think the Conservative Party are actually smart enough to realise that's one of the reasons why they're sitting on a big majority. And I haven't seen any evidence from Labour to suggest that they've realised it's one of the things that the working class certainly don't like about them. But that's not really the point I was wanting to make. The point that I was wanting to make is that I think one of the reasons why wokeness is having such a problem is because its way of going about fixing problems feels very alien to the British way of doing things.
Yeah, 100%.
It's it's a very social justice type movement, and social justice is, well, again, a concept that is kind of anti-British because it's almost like a form of collective justice across identity lines, and which is completely counter to the liberal individualistic way that we've, not always, because obviously, back in the days of the British Empire there was rampant racism, which is a form of racial segregation and all these sorts of things, but what I'm saying is that when you look historically, our society has become more individualistic and more individualistic until it's broken down the racist structures within it. And then all of a sudden this movement's come along and said, hey, you've done a great job, but it's not enough. So what we need to do is we need to go back to collective racialization again. And the British people just know that that's not the way you do these things because, they've spent the whole last 100 years trying to correct that in an individualistic kind of way.
It's I think it also comes from this delusion. Some people have misunderstood the world we live in. I think partially because of social media. I think they think we're really close to fascism in Britain and America and across Europe. I think they're like, whoa, we are basically doing a goose step, but because I don't know, are people not informed about what happened in the 20th century, or are we just like, are we thinking so much like, no, we can't go back to that, we're too scared of it, that we're pushing these things that are like, yes, this will make it better if everyone can get into their own groups. I really don't understand, because it used to be, and in the like early 2000s, in the 90s, it was kind of like, like colorblindness was what everyone was aiming for. It was, I don't care what you like, what your skin color is, if you're a man or a woman or neither, or what, like it didn't matter. But now it's like we have to care about that so much. That's why people are putting like their sexuality or like mental illnesses or genders in their profiles, in their like bios, because it's saying like, look, this is what I am. And it's
can I give you a very candid example of that thing that you've just been explaining? And it's been one of the things that really annoyed me this year, and that was when the football was on, when the European, and England did great, and we got, we came second, and the Italians, very fairly, they were the better team, they won. And but one of the things that really, really bothered me about it was the almost instant way that as soon as England started to do really well and it looked like there was a chance of winning, the usual culprits for perpetuating this kind of thing, such as The Guardian, came out and said, well, the reason why the England team is doing so well is because of its diversity. It's like, and that really annoyed me, because it's not, that in itself is not, I just saw all those men on the pitch as Englishmen. That was it. I didn't care about anything else. They were all boys born in England, doing their part for their country. I didn't care what the race was. But then all these people who want to see everything through a racial lens are saying, well, we're winning because of the racial differences. We're winning because of the racial differences. It's like, and then you get to the final, it's like, all right, well, diversity just lost. What now? And because they've set it up, you can only see this success through race, does that mean that when we have failures, they can only also be looked through by race? Because I don't want to go down that road. But if they're going to, if that's how they're going to frame it, then good luck with that, because we're not always going to win everything. So...
Yeah, no, exactly. It's... There is. I have found some hopeful research that I'll share with you,
sure,
Lucas. So there's a organisation called More in Common, and they go and do research into people's views, both like across loads of different countries. This one is from the UK, More in Common study. So they look at different people's views, and they see like what the perception gaps are with people. So, what they think the opposite side think, and what the opposite side actually think. And other studies into, people's thoughts about the world around them. So this study is called Dousing the Fire. Most people thought that this culture, this woke culture, is actually undermining British culture. They think it's anti-British, and it's going to stop the progress that we've made in the past. They said they were deeply concerned about the way politicians and campaigners are inflaming culture wars, because it's not really the way a culture should develop, especially with the the kind of cultural backdrop and the political backdrop.
Okay. Yeah. There was another example that I saw. It was very funny how you said that wokeness is a threat to British culture, because I think if you were to find one photo in the past sort of few years to absolutely symbolise that, and you could understand why British people might feel very scared for their culture and their heritage and all these sorts of things. I think it's to look no further than the desecration of the Winston Churchill statue in the middle of London at the height of last year during the Black Lives Matter protests, because I think it's that thing that, obviously, I know all the arguments. I know that that Churchill was a racist, and that that he has a pretty sketchy historical record when it comes to colonialism in India, and all of those sorts of things. And I don't want to get into that right now, because it's a totally different conversation. But it's just that thing that, he's the gentleman that whenever the polls have been done in the decades past, he's always been the number one Briton. He's always been the person that our country is most grateful towards. He's always the one who seemed to have made the crowning achievement, which is getting this country through World War II, helping to defeat fascism and National Socialism on the continent. And if that isn't good enough, then is there really any point in any of us doing anything?
I think with that instance, I think it's more of it's about radicalization and polarization on social media. I think these people have been kind of like pushed and convinced that this is what they need to do, and this will like start, like, it's like, Douglas Murray says that young people, well, not young people, but these people who social justice warriors love to pull down the walls we've kind of erected, the walls of, like, agreed upon truth, because they see it as power structures. But really, they're just hierarchies which enable us to function in a society. But it's the catch-all terms of, like, anyway, that's what were you talking about?
Well, no, just the fact that with the Winston Churchill statue.
Yeah, Winston Churchill. Yeah, I think so. Actually, Knicker's Theatre are doing developing a cyber performance about misinformation online, and we're going to take it to workshops in colleges and stuff. But one thing I did actually really want to look at was the how these ideas turn into real life action, and you see it in like QAnon followers and 5G conspiracy theorists, that they'll go and burn down a cell phone tower. I think it's exactly what the social justice warriors are doing. I think it's their January 6th. Everyone was locked up indoors for so long on social media, and if you're in an echo chamber that's consuming all of these ideas that the world and Britain is a horrible, racist, homophobic, patriarchal society, and so many people are oppressed and treated so badly, I think you can believe that when you're online, because you're not in reality, so you don't see that that's just not the case, and we are the luckiest people of all time.
Definitely.
In the history of the world, we are the most comfortable, most lucky people. But it's St. George in retirement. We need to go and fight another dragon and find another dragon to fight.
Yes. Yes, there's more of a demand for racists than we actually have the supply of them.
And so if we think racism is such a bad problem and is so awful, and it's perpetuated by symbols like statues, it sounds like a crazy idea, but can you imagine, like, at any revolution, statues are pulled down, and so it's kind of in the lexicon of uprising. And so I think maybe they were having their own little revolution that no one else really understood.
Yes, well, this was one.
You can see why they behave that way. I don't think it's right at all.
No,
but you can see why people are pushed to group acts of violence and vandalism.
Yes, you can, and especially, but I think this comes back to the thing, and it was one of the things that I was talking to Matt about on our podcast together when we were back talking about the Labour Party, just the idea that, the British people, historically speaking, aren't a particularly revolutionary people. We're not into tearing things down. We're into building things up slowly through time. And so if you have a bunch of revolutionaries, it's understandable that they would get even more frustrated with the system, because you're talking about incremental change and they're saying, no, we don't have time for that, we need it now. And so it will resort to more, so it's a completely different worldview and a different way of going about things and doing change. I mean, obviously, my preference is the standard English way of doing things, and just, things generally coming together through time, and I think it's the safest way to get them done. It's the way that certainly creates the least amount of fallout, because it's like the Edward Colston statue. When that came down, there was it got dragged down and thrown into the the Bristol Harbour and everything, and it was just a case of, well, sure, people had been petitioning for a good number of years to have it brought down, but democratically speaking, within Bristol Council, most people wanted it to stay up. So I'm sorry, you don't get to just flip the table and tear it down because you didn't get the answer you want. It might be that in 20 years, there might be enough people who agree, yes, it's time for it to go, or it's time for it to get a plaque, and that's fine. It's not about my problem isn't if the statue comes down. My problem is how and why the statue comes down. And someone just turning up one day and saying, this bothers me, and I know most people want it, but no, screw you. I don't think that's an acceptable way to behave. I don't think it's, it should be condemned.
It's also interesting when it's like, a lot of the time it's like, so my friend said this to me the other day, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting point. He was like, normally it's like white people being offended on behalf of black people in this case. And I mean, I don't know how true that is. I've been to a few BLM protests, and of course it's definitely something that we need to embrace all together, and it not just, not make it just one group's issue. But yeah, I think the perception gap of people on Twitter that go and rip down statues, thinking that Britain is such a racist country, I think it's kind of a failing of social media platforms. I think, if you're able to create a echo chamber on Twitter, which it's so easy to do, like you have hashtags, you can follow certain people, they'll retweet, and so it's all just in the same bubble.
And block other people because you don't want to hear their voices.
And then if you weren't even, outraged enough, they have what you missed in the last 48 hours. And so, you're constantly, you've got something to be outraged against.
Well, it's almost like, here's your Orwellian 2 minutes of hate target for today. For you to scream and shout at and boo, and, we're telling you shouldn't like this person.
Yeah, and it's this idea that everyone is an activist. Academics are activists, teachers are activists. It's very strange, and you don't want to say, well, that's a bit silly, because, who doesn't like activism? Who doesn't like change and progress? But they don't seem to understand that there's 50% of the rest of the population that are conservative, or
more than
maybe
50% at this point.
More than
way
that.
more.
I think Labour lost the red.
Yes.
Like, it's definitely down to this preoccupation with what people think and say and do and tweet and even just might think.
Yes. It's very, very strange. I'd just like to talk to you a bit more about the universities, which is what we started on. So recently, it's one of the few things that I'd praise the current government for, but they put through a bill basically with these free speech champions coming onto university campuses. And there was a lot of criticism from the Labour benches from this, because they said this bill is bad because it will enable anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists, to talk on these to give university lecturers. I'll come to your thoughts on it in a second, but I just wanted to say that, again, this seems to be, given that we already know that universities are inherently very left-wing places, it does seem like a little bit of a rabbit in the headlights moment with them realising, that's a lot of where we're getting our ideas from, but this bill isn't going to shut down those ideas. It's just going to let the other ideas have the right to defend themselves without being platformed and told that, despite being invited, that's what the bill's protecting. If you're invited to speak, then you can speak, and if these bunch of activists do take that away from you, then the university will be fined, because it has a moral duty to protect freedom of speech on campuses. So I just wanted to ask if you knew much about the bill, or if you'd paid attention to it, or if you had any thoughts on it from what I've described.
I don't know much about it, but I do think it's kind of definitely a hallmark of Boris Johnson. He always waits until something's too late. It's too late, and then he swoops in and
Yes.
passes a bill or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good thing because obviously it can go so far that there. It's not that there aren't. Yeah, I do think that universities do and institutions do have the ability to not discriminate against wrongthink, but like passively do it. And so, say, who was it? It was Peter Boghossian. He was not up for a promotion despite having excellent references and the wherewithal to do it, but he's not been promoted, and he thinks it's because he is the only openly conservative person at his university. And you see it with other lecturers that get deplatformed. I especially think of Jordan Peterson. He gets called, a right-wing Nazi by The Guardian. That's just bad journalism, because he's been lecturing about the warnings of fascism and communism over the last 20th century for so long, most of his career.
Yes.
And so just to be branded something that you're not, because you don't think speech laws should, or hate speech laws should, include something so trivial as misgendering someone. I think that's it's slander at the end of the day. This kind of if someone has wrong think, you can get rid of them because you can just slander them and you can cancel them. And it's the same. It's just McCarthyism, because we're so scared of like dangerous ideas, because it's like we don't trust ourselves to be able to spot a bad idea. So we're just going to shut all of them down that don't fit into the ideology.
Yes. I suppose a really good example of that was back in the was it towards the sort of the end of the 2000s, when the Nick Griffin, the head of the BNP, went on Question Time. And, a lot of people were really worrying, saying, you can't put this man on. His views are deplorable. It's going to be an absolute disaster. Thinking, oh my gosh, if we let this man go on TV, the British people are going to become Nazis overnight. And it was like, and he went on there, and it was basically the death of his party, because he was given the freedom of speech to air his views, and everyone realised what absurd views and positions he actually held. And, so if it weren't for free speech in that case, things could have been worse, because, in fact, all it would have been instead was these academics and journalists saying, you can't listen to what this man has to say, you can't listen to this man. And the more you make him the enemy of, the more people will be inclined to go, well, he's clearly onto something that you're scared about. So, and that is what would encourage more people to go over to it, because, he's being branded a heretic and he's been ousted by everyone. So it's the freedom to discuss ideas in an open forum rather than have them working, underground, so to speak.
It's like black market. Philosophy, isn't it? It's
that's a really good. I like that, black market philosophy.
And the thing about this kind of social justice warrior ideology, let's tear down all the walls. It's a small handful of people on Twitter. It's a very small handful. So there's studies to suggest that. So it's something like 20% of people that write tweets. I can't remember the fact, but it shows that a small percentage of the top Twitter,
blue check
people who
marks,
tweet the most have the most. Oh, I can't even remember. Sorry.
No,
that's really awful.
That's all right.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left, Verity, so I've just sort of got two more questions rattling around in my brain here. And I'm just going to take a back seat now. I'm just going to let you answer them, have your take on them, and then it'll probably be time to wrap up. So one that I'd like to put to you is, and because, again, this is totally wrapped into the culture war, if the culture war is the denigration of British culture, through these woke, means in order for what they perceive to be a better racial parity, more social justice, all these sorts of things, the movement in our universities, that one of the ones that I'm chiefly concerned about is the decolonisation movement of our universities. You see this a lot, that all of a sudden, there was one up in Scotland, wasn't there, this year, that we can't teach we can't teach To Kill a Mockingbird anymore, because despite showing the evils of slavery, the main character upholds the idea of the white saviour. And we also can't teach this. There was a chap from the sort of, a scholastic English gentleman from the clergy in like the 1300s or something at Leicester. I can't remember the gentleman's name, and it was the idea that, well, we're taking him off the course because for no other reason than the course is there's too many white people on the course. We talk about too many white people, despite the fact that white people have basically been the only race in Britain, majoritively, to a big wave of immigration came until 1960. But all of a sudden we're acting like, well, we've always been this, so we can't address that, and it's not good enough for now. We have a new way of doing things. So your thoughts? I'm monologuing now. I'm doing...
No, I think it is very ignorant. It's trying to rewrite history through this revisionist lens. So we're trying to put our 21st century beliefs onto the history of even the 20th century. And I think also because of the horrors of the 20th century, we're so scared of that. We're so scared of getting anywhere near that again, that we're being quite alarmist about it, and so we're trying to erase the fact that we ever acted this way, and so I think that's it also throws up ideas like white guilt, that white people are inherently evil, and white supremacy, and just that there is always racism if there's any sort of incident with a white person and a person that's not white. I just think it's trying to fix history to get rid of all the bits that we don't like, and they're saying let's decolonize the classroom and teach about other cultures and other events around the world. And I think that's great. I can't say no to that. I mean, we both studied world performance, the study of theatre around the world,
Yes.
And so I think it's a hard argument, because it's of course I don't want everything to be uber British and uber white and uber British and uber white and because that's not history and that's not how we should learn. But I think this call to decolonize is kind of where you haven't put any parameters on this. We don't know when it's gonna. Are you just going to try and get rid of all the bits of history that we don't like, because then it's going to prevent us from learning from that? If we can't talk about, I don't know, if we can't talk about the Civil War because that's Eurocentric, then how are we going to learn about our own almost revolution, which is actually a very important part of history, and a very, very important part of religious history, especially, in Britain. But then again, we should also learn about apartheid in South Africa. So I think it definitely needs to have a holistic approach, but definitely not an approach that sees everything through race and gender and grievance and immutable characteristics, because then what are you learning? You're always learning that these groups are oppressed and they will forever be oppressed. If we rewrite our history and we reframe our history, we're going to make it our future. So we're going to make a very segregated future, and one that isn't very free to think or speak or ask questions.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to hold to my promise, and I'm not going to say a word. I'm just going to enjoy your thoughts on that. Okay, but the second one I think is something that we can just sort of round the whole discussion off on. Okay, so, by happenstance, I was... I didn't know how much we'd agree on things when you came onto this podcast, and it didn't matter, of course. I didn't care if we agreed on everything or nothing. The point is just to have these conversations. By chance, it seems that we agree on quite a lot. So what, in your opposition to woke, would you say is the way to move forward in one? Because the way that my concern is that, as we've already discussed, mostly the British public aren't woke. They don't agree with it, and yet it has it's calling the shots in so many in the universities, in the big corporations. Gosh, it'll take me 30 seconds to go in depth and explain them all, but. The way that Sainsbury's deals with things, the way that Lidl and all these, and even banking, they're everywhere. Everywhere at the top is either virtue signalling and using wokist language, or they believe it. The only institution that is currently not woke, and even then is not expressly anti it, seems to be the government. And they're not really fighting back against it very hard. So how do you think we overcome it and get it out of the tops of these institutions and back to a dialogue on the more British means of individualism?
I think we need to...
It's a big question. It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big answer. I think we need to restructure social media and technology. I think we need to make it humane. The work that Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin are doing over at the Centre of Humane Technology is brilliant, because they have so many ideas about how to break up echo chambers and how to prevent polarization and radicalization, because it is very algorithmically driven. But at the same time, I think I think universities and institutions like the BBC and
yes, that was one that I should have mentioned. That was probably one of the best examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should try and stay as neutral as possible and as critical as possible. But I mean, obviously the BBC is not doing that. Because I don't think that there's not a fashion for thinking critically anymore. There's a fashion for reading infographics on Instagram and parroting ideas. And I think short form media also helps spread these very extreme views. I think our media ecosystems, I think our media is broken, definitely. Barry Weiss talks about this so well. She's got a brilliant podcast called Honestly with Barry Weiss. She left the New York Times because it was becoming too lefty. I'm not going to say liberal. No. Because they're not liberal.
No, they're not.
They are authoritarian, so authoritarian. And so that's why she left. And she talks about how our media ecosystems are becoming more polarized um, and being owned by factions and alliances. It's very strange, and I think a lot needs to happen, because I was listening to Lionel Shriver, and they said that this woke nonsense would end with when there's a horrible worldwide catastrophe. This was before the global pandemic.
It's a shame there hasn't been one then, isn't it?
And that happened. Like, there was one good thing that could come out of this pandemic, yet people got sucked in more. So I think there needs to be, and also a marketplace of ideas. I think that's what we're really missing, especially with the rise of social media. Like, you'd think it would give us a big, a large space to communicate and debate, but it's actually taken away our marketplace of ideas through cancel culture and these filter bubbles that you're never going to hear the opposing view, or even credible media. I think the credibility of media is really, really something that is, it's in disarray. Like, you read, things don't even have to be news anymore. It's like, is that news? You know, like with Elliot Page coming out, that was like a 3-day news cycle. And why is that news? Why is this suddenly so important?
Because
is that news?
It is, if you buy into, if you accept the presuppositions that most people are going to have a hard time accepting it. But which is obviously what the news media believes. It believes that when Elliot Page obviously transitioned, that the world wasn't going to like it and they were going to put it front and centre because the world had to learn to deal with it, because that is the way that things were. That's my idea about it. That's how I think it probably is.
The attention economy. I think that this is all driven by, trying to get as much of our attention or data and then sell it. I also think that our words are broken. So I think quite a lot of things. I think media, the institutions, and words are all broken. Because, say, like diversity means how many people of different characteristics are in the room, but it doesn't necessarily allow for viewpoint diversity.
I think diversity just means not white. You could have a very diverse cast. Because you saw the word put about, that back a few years ago when Black Panther was a victory for diversity. It's like, I mean, it's like the whole cast is black apart from, 2 of the actors. And I don't care, because it made sense within what it was in. But, it's very interesting to see the way that words are used. And, I'm not a person that particularly cares about, I believe in equality of opportunity. I believe that this country should strive certainly to increase opportunities for people, but I believe it should do those things on the basis of merit. So I'm totally against diversity quotas and all those sorts of things, because I can't think imagine going through your entire life not knowing whether you'd been successful just because someone had decided that you needed the hand because of your race or because of your actual merits and talents to get there. I think that'd be quite a dreadful thing to live with, to be honest with you. And very patronising way to have been treated your entire life. So, Verity, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm going to do a public service announcement. Set screen timers on your phone so you know that you don't go on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram too much. You can set screen timers in settings, I think. So that's a good thing to do.
That's very good. I like that. The good thing is as well that I don't have TikTok, never have, never will. But Amiable Arguments does have Facebook and Instagram, so if you'd like to follow us on that, then please do. And I'm in the process of making some infographics, which Verity was saying we should not take notice of anymore. But I absolutely agree. But I have to market myself somehow, and so I'm just going to take this last minute to. Verity, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's been wonderful to get your thoughts on this whole range of subjects. You know, we've cut across the board and we've discussed quite a lot of things, but I think that's just goes to show just how vast this culture war is and how much it's been fought over in so many aspects of society. And it wouldn't surprise me if this is something that takes a good few decades to sort of level out. But, you know, I'm here doing my part. You're doing your part with your Knickers Theatre Company, which I will leave descriptions to down in the description box below, so all of you can go and follow Verity's work. I've seen some of it myself. It's very, very funny. She's got a real knack for talent and comedy. And also, a huge thank you to my friend Irina for the artwork that will cover this podcast. And yes, I've thanked just about everyone. So have a great evening, everyone. It's good to be back doing these, and I'll see you again for the next Amiable Argument.